Chris Burns, and welcome to The Network. Hard talk with a matrix of newsmakers. The headlines. Collectively, eurosceptic parties on the left and right will become a major force in Parliament if pre-election opinion polls are correct. What impact on EU policy? Could eurosceptics become kingmakers for the next Parliament and Commission leadership? Will the EU become ungovernable, and is that just what they want? Could eurosceptics force a hardened policy on immigration, protectionism, and a dismantling of EU regulations creating a European single market? Why are European Parliament elections often protest votes that elect fringe politicians? How to persuade voters that the balloting should be more than that? Now, wired into this edition of The Network is Philip Claes, member of the Belgian Eurosceptic Vlaams Belang Party in the European Parliament. You're now a candidate for the National Parliament. Sophie Heine, who heads the Belgian branch of the Federalist Party Stand Up for Us Europe in the European Parliament elections. And Doru Frantescu, who's policy director and co-founder of Vote Watch Europe, a think tank monitoring the elections. Let's start with a question for all of you, starting with Philip. Are eurosceptics just protest voters, or does it go deeper than that?
Yes, of course it goes deeper than that. You cannot merely dismiss them as like second-rate votes. People voting for these parties want something positive. They want national sovereignty. They want a European cooperation based on free trade, but based on national governments being independent. And they want more transparency, more democracy, and more accountability to the voters.
Sophie?
Yeah. Well, I agree with you that it goes deeper than merely a protest vote. I think it is partly a protest vote also against national politics. It reflects a deeper disillusion towards politics, which actually triggers protest votes.
So then isn't that a protest vote?
Yeah, no, it is a protest vote against the way politics work at the moment. There are objective reasons why a lot of people nowadays should be eurosceptic. But I think the analysis is partly right, but the solutions proposed are wrong.
Okay, Doru, is this a protest vote? Does it go deeper? Do you think there's actually, is it here to stay, this eurosceptic trend?
I do think it's a protest vote, that's clear, but the reason for this may be different. Whereas in some countries, like in the southern countries, the people go towards the left and towards the far left because of protesting against austerity measures, against the measures to which they associate with the European Commission. In the north of Europe, the reason is different. In the north of Europe, some part of the public associate migration with the European Commission, and they are protesting against immigration, what they think it is excessive immigration.
Okay. In any case, one could say that it's voter anger. And do you think that anger could be expressed actually concretely, that the eurosceptic parties could become kingmakers for the next EU leadership? Philip?
I don't know about being kingmakers, but the eurosceptic and the nationalist parties will play a much more important role in this European Parliament than has been the case up till now.
Sure, and you're going to want to have influence on the choice of the next leaders, right?
Yeah, but we didn't put forward a candidate for the European Commission because we want the European Commission to play a completely different role than it plays today. We want more power to the European Council. The member states should have their say much more than is the case today.
Sophie?
It's important to remind that the European Parliament is not the only institution, and the Commission and the Council hopefully won't be as eurosceptic. I would also like to add that even if the eurosceptics get more influence on European politics as such, it could be in different ambivalent directions, and it could actually trigger the federalist pro-European responses, make them feel responsible for voicing their message a bit better.
Concretely, what sort of influence, impact could that have, euroscepticism have, on certain issues that the Parliament faces today?
I think that the stronger presence of the Eurosceptics in the European Parliament will certainly affect the behavior of the other mainstream parties, which will have to take them into consideration when making the coalitions, because now they will have to base themselves on different numbers. However, to what extent the Eurosceptics will be influenced in the European Parliament depends on many factors, chief of these factors being to what extent they will be able to work together, the Eurosceptic on the left, the Eurosceptic on the right, and there are big divisions even between them.
So the mainstream might have to make deals then with the Eurosceptic parties, and that could pull them in a certain direction. Sophie, are you worried about that?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said, I think Euroscepticism reflects deeper trends, and I think in a way it could increase the politicization of European issues, and I think it will push the
like
federalist...
Like immigration,
but other issues as well. It will actually push the federalists within the mainstream left and the mainstream right in the European Parliament and also at national levels. It will push them inside them to clarify their messages and to express their true federalism.
Philip, there could be then maybe parties like yours might actually have influence and get what you want on immigration, for instance.
When you see that there is no control anymore of the internal borders in the EU, but that the external borders are not sufficiently controlled either, so this gives a lot of new problems. And we want the member states to be able again to control their own borders and to decide who is coming in and under what conditions.
Okay, that seems to make sense, but the mainstream parties are arguing against you. Dodo, do you think that maybe that the Eurosceptic parties, like Philip's, is doing a better job of communicating? Is that the problem, communication?
I certainly think that the mainstream parties are not doing a very good job in communication, because if they did, then the Eurosceptics wouldn't get that far in terms of number of seats. And it will be interesting to see what they will do in the next European Parliament, because the mainstream parties will have to choose between either doing alliances with Eurosceptics or making grand coalitions between themselves, which will fuel more the Euroscepticism.
Right, there you go. Sophie, what do you think?
I don't think it's only a problem of communication. I think it's also a problem of the actual policies that were put in place by the mainstream parties. For instance, in Stand Up for Europe, we actually don't agree with that kind of Europe, with the current Europe we have. And I think most citizens disagree with that kind of Europe. We want more Europe, but in a different direction. And I think that's what most citizens want.
Well, that's the thing. The more Europe thing is very easy to criticize and blast. But on the other hand, what about the solutions that the Eurosceptics are presenting, like dropping the euro, like scrapping the Schengen Agreement? I mean, are these really realistic solutions?
Yes, of course they are realistic. It's not realistic, for instance, to keep countries like Greece that don't fulfill the conditions to stay in the Eurozone, to keep them internally in this Eurozone, because it will cost a lot of money and it causes a lot of tensions, not only in the member states that have to pay for this, but also in a state like Greece itself, where they have to undergo austerity measures.
Dodo, do you see these solutions as being realistic?
I don't think so. For the most part of them, I think that the problems are much more complex to come up to them with so simple solutions, because the problems to the economy are so big, which it makes it difficult to think that countries separately can deal with them together. And I think that countries collectively in the European Union are much better suited to deal with these bigger problems.
But if we have an orientation like that, if we're moving in that direction with more Eurosceptic parties, does this spell the end of European integration?
Well, there is a risk. There is a real risk of rupture, of breaks, and that's why federalists should unite and try and defend this European project, but not as it is, as I said, because a lot of criticisms are totally grounded and objective. But the only way to save the euro is actually to complement it, to supplement it with a European economic government in a totally different direction from what we have now, and to also have a social Europe and a fiscal Europe and a harmonization of taxation. That's what we need, not getting out of the euro.
But the people just don't want this to happen.
Because it's not
more and more people in the member states are fed up with this Europe that wants to mingle in internal affairs of the member states. Why should we have a social Europe? You know, social security and things like this have to be done on a national level, because this is the level of democracy where things can really work.
Let me ask you one last question very quickly, each of you. Do you think that this Eurosceptic trend is going to scare voters to the polls, or scare the voters to the polls, or attract the voters to the polls?
I think that this, interestingly enough, may act as an incentive for voters to come to the polls, because now the voters have understand more the stakes that are there in the European elections and for the European Parliament, and this will create more interest for the voters, both supporting Eurosceptics and the mainstream parties, to come to vote this time around.
Sophie, scare or attract voters to the polls?
Well, I think it should attract voters to vote for federalist tendencies, but for that actually promote another Europe, not the Europe we have now. I hope it does.
Philip, scare or attract?
No, it will attract people. I think they have a chance now of really doing something and really see that all the votes are going to count. And I want the Eurosceptic votes to be taken into account.
Philip, thanks very much. I'd like to thank all of our guests, Philip Claes, Sophie Heine, and Dodo Frantescu. I'm Chris Burns, and until next time, thanks for connecting with The Network.